This is Jacqueline White. Today is December 10th, 2008, and I'm going to be interviewing Mr. Tom Thornton. Tom's going to tell us about his family that's lived in Texas for 4 generations. Tom?
Well, the oldest one, I think, was my great-grandfather, Edward Thornton, and he was one of the Caney Creek boys prior to the Civil War. And I think he must have served as a runner, because he was coming back and forth from where the unit was, bringing letters back to relatives in Caney Creek. And in the 1880s, he was a city marshal. And there was always family history about how he had to shoot some people in the line of duty, and one of which was that one of the people he had to shoot was one of Belle Starr's men, and that he had to hide out in Ector for a while to make sure that they weren't after him. Then I had a cousin who read that got out of the library in Denton, that he had gone to the Palace Saloon to serve a warrant and had to end up shooting the fella because he wouldn't go quietly and pulled his gun. And I'm assuming that those stories were the same, but at least one of them had documented in the records. And he had a house on 5th Street, and a cousin of mine, a third cousin, read in the newspaper where someone wrote about him when they tore his house down. It's the one my dad was born in, and I think the one my grandfather was born in, and listed the names of the kids that grew up there. And there was one name in there, I don't remember it right now, that I never heard of. And later on, I think I figured that was one of his daughters who married a guy, and then the guy died and she came back to live in the household. But I didn't know anything about her until I saw that newspaper article. My grandfather owned a barbershop on Panther Row, and he also ran a cleaners, and he moved around a lot, but this was always home. And one time when he sold it to a brother of his who was a sign painter. His name was Doug Thornton. And there are paintings and pictures around where after he did a paint job for somebody, he put his signature at the bottom of whatever he painted, and it was Doug did it. And he had the barbershop and he did the sign paintings. Dad grew up here, but he moved around a lot. In fact, when we were living here, he had an opportunity. He worked for Major Cole at the picture shows, and he had an opportunity to go out to Snyder to manage 6 movie houses out there. And he said, no, I'm not going to do it. He said, I moved to 8 different places and had to go to 8 different schools growing up, and I'm not going to do that to my family, so he turned it down. He graduated from Post High School, but Bonham was always home to him also. But my grandfather's name was Tom, and so that's one of the names my names was named after both grandfathers. One was John Elijah and Farmer, and the other one was Thomas Rorax Thornton. And I've not ever run across that name anywhere else. So now, 3 generations later, there's still a Tom Thornton in Bonham. As far as growing up here, I always, later on when I was able to know stuff, we lived on 4th Street, which was right next door to my great aunt's house. And my great aunt dad was my great aunt's favorite nephew. And the house that I grew up in, I was born in an apartment in my great aunt's house. Her name was Kitty Jackson, and her husband was one of the barbers in my granddad's barbershop. And she was kind of like Miss Daisy. She could do anything. She built a rock fence around the back part of her house. She did her own gardening and her own painting, and anything needed to be done, she did it for herself. As a matter of fact, at one time when I was 2 or 3 years old, she owned a Ford Coupe, and she had heart trouble, and my dad's mother had heart trouble, and they were told not to take me out in the car. So naturally, and when everybody was gone, they took me out in the car. And it was one of those enjoyable experiences because they were 2 fun ladies. I don't remember a whole lot about my grandmother because I don't think she lived too much longer after that. But anyway, I grew up in this house next door, and it was at one time a one-room house. It had 20-foot ceiling in it. And my aunt built 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a kitchen and a back porch onto it. And that's where I grew up. And she would come over, and my mother tells this story that if I had a button off my shirt, she'd sew it on so that if it ever came off again, it took the shirt with it. And there was always that back and forth between the two. What is now Catron Park was the Fisher lot when I was growing up, and I didn't know till after I moved back to Bonham in '99 that Fisher owned that whole part of that area down around East 2nd Street, and that the elder Mr. Fisher owned the house that's on the corner there, and that's the one that Minnie Gribble lived in when my dad was young. She was, I think at this time, she was the elementary principal of Bailey English. And one day he told the story about going to school. He walked up 5th Street to Cedar and then walked down Cedar to the school. And she was coming up from East 2nd Street and somehow turned over her car right at the corner of 5th and Cedar. So naturally, as a boy would, he stopped to look at the wreck. And he said her head popped out of an open window and pointed her finger at him and said, "Buster Thornton, you get to school right now." He said he didn't quit running till he got there. When I was working in Dallas, W.T. White was once in the late 20s. He was a superintendent in Bonham. And we would have a convocation of all the teachers in Dallas, and we'd have to meet at the convention center. And there probably would be, 6,000 or 7,000 of us. And every time we had a convocation, he told a Minnie Gribble story. One of the few women that ever told him what to do. And she told everybody what to do. But growing up in that house on 4th Street, Dad worked at the movie house when I was smaller, and so he would work till midnight and then come home, and of course then he would have to eat, drink coffee and unwind, Then he'd sleep a little later in the morning than most people. And that was a routine. Of course, we'd already gone to school. We didn't know when he got up. But when I was in high school, I tried to go out for basketball in the junior high. We didn't really have junior high in the 8th and 9th grades. Basketball practice was at 6:30 in the morning. So since they were both sleeping, since they both got up, stayed up real late at night, I'd get up, fix my own breakfast, and take off to school. Didn't know anything different. And then my mother got sick, and everything changed. And it's a whole different routine for several years. But we lived on, the driveway was a hill, and we had a dirt floor garage. And it just so happened it was right down the street from Ford's Drive-In. So as a teenager, that was one of the places we hung out, was at Ford's Drive-In. So after I got to driving, the rule was after I got out of high school, I could go down there and hang out if I wanted to, but the car had to be in the garage at 12. That was convenient that I could just walk down there then. During the high school years, we had probably a great advantage in that everybody loved to go out to State Park and dance and swim, and the Bibees, Martha and Jim Bybee, had moved back into the area, and they had a friend in Dallas who owned a dance studio, and they would learn the latest dances, and I think it was on Tuesdays. Once every Tuesday we would go out to what was then the VFW hall out on what's now 56. And they would teach us the latest ballroom steps, and we'd put a quarter in the pot. Then at the end of the year, we would have a formal dance with a real band, and those quarters paid for the band.
Nice.
And we would wear it was a formal. We would wear jackets and ties, and girls would wear dresses and the big petticoats and all like that. I think, had a tremendous advantage in that we liked to do that. Then my mother and dad got interested in square dancing, so they taught just about everybody in school how to square dance. We had that out at Jones Field in one of the old barracks out there. That went on for 2 or 3 years. Most everybody was a part of that, being together as a whole high school group. which my kids say must have been a magical time of life, and it was. Almost everybody will say that. Reminiscing odds and ends that come to mind. When I was in the first grade, I decided that I was tired of school that one day, and I just went home. But I went down what is now Highway 56, which was 82 then, and I walked up from Duncan School, where the Rayburn Library is, up behind the Peeler building, and picked up a few treasures like used syringe needles. Then I walked down behind the American Theater and went down by the Mule Barn and picked up some horseshoe nails. And by the time I got home, I had been going around the town for about 2 hours, and I had a person waiting on me when I got home. You know, in those days, you didn't do anything that your parents didn't know it 5 minutes after. So she was sitting on the front porch waiting on me to get home. I think she somehow knew that I would be home, but I might take a little time getting there. I didn't do that anymore. This has been in Edward Sutherland's column. When they would fog for mosquitoes, the city would fog for mosquitoes, and all of us kids in the summertime, we all played outside till after dark. And here would come the fogger who used DDT spray, and we'd all get behind the fogger in the smoke and chase up and down the street, and we've all wondered how come we didn't die. But we all did it, so it was, for several years, Edward's a little younger than I am, and he'd remember doing it too. So we lived over that. And when they dug a well, artesian well, down at what's now Catron Park. And they dig the big hole, and then they put gray drilling mud in it. And I went down there by myself one day and slid down that gray drilling mud into the water. And somehow I managed to get back out of that hole. So it's a wonder that I'm here talking today, some of the silly things that I did when I was a kid. My mother's mother and dad lived out on West 12th Street, and at that time there was nothing out there. There was a few houses, and there was Mr. Duckworth's farm, where now the projects are. And my grandfather had 4 acres, and he had chickens, and he had an orchard, and he had a truck farm, and he had a cow. And they moved into town from the Danner community out north of town. So my grandmother had hogs, and my grandfather raised bees. And since they were coming to town, my grandfather said, and he was John Farmer, said, Inez, you can't take your hogs to town. And she says, well then, if I can't take my hogs to town, you can't take your bees to town. So they sold the hog and the bees, and they moved everything else to town. And so I played in and out of that 4 acres all my life. My job helping in the truck farm was to dig potatoes. I don't think anybody else wanted to. And you had to get down on your knees to dig them up, and I was small, so I got that job of digging potatoes. Mother tells a story. She had 4 brothers, and they didn't have indoor plumbing. Well, they had it by the time I was born, but they didn't have it when they bought the house. And all her brothers would wait till she got to the outhouse, and then they'd go out there and start rocking it. And one of them shot her with a BB gun, and then ran in the house and hid up under the bed like he wasn't going to get caught. And so she grew up with all those brothers, so she was as much a tomboy as any man ever was. In the 40s, I think it was 48, I know in 48 and 49 we had pretty severe ice storm. And Dad was working at the radio station by then, and they were the only one in town that had electricity because they had an auxiliary power supply. But I remember I think I was in the 8th grade, it must have been 49. I was in the 8th grade when we had that ice storm. And a friend of mine and they let school out. And all the parents, of course, was trying to come get their kids. And there's a little bit of hill going around the circle there to the back to pick them up. And it was very difficult for people to get up that small hill and make that turn. So a friend of mine and we went and got us some flat boards and a couple of straps and put nails in in the bottom of the boards and went around for 50 cents pushing people out of the ditch. We actually made a little money. Some of them actually paid us to do that. But during that time, I had a chemistry set, and Dad and I would make candles with a chemistry set, and we also bought a crystal radio set and put it together. And I think it was the Joe Louis Kahn fight. I had that thing on the crystal radio set on a windowsill and listened to that fight on that crystal radio set, laying on my bed. One time, my mother had gone down to the corner to Ruth Houston's grocery store, because during that ice storm, I don't remember which one it was, but she had an electric freezer that she kept her ice cream and stuff in, and she was afraid it was going to melt. So anybody in the neighborhood that did business with her, she invited them to come down and get ice cream and just take it home. So we had a gas refrigerator, so we went down there and stocked up on ice cream. And I don't remember, this is the time anyway, when she slammed the door to go down the street, the curtain caught fire. And my brother and I were in our bedroom. So I ran out the door to get her, just left him in the bedroom. So when we got back, he didn't know any difference. He was just playing. And she was not happy that I had just left him there in the room. That's a little incident. But when it was time for a meal, all they had to do was go to the back porch and whistle or yell, and I'd hear them down in the Fisher lot, and come home for lunch or dinner or whatever. Real convenient. We had another uncle who lived down on 2nd Street, who was a cabinet maker. He made all kinds of nice little furniture and stuff like that. And one of their kids came home from the war and had a dog, an attack dog. Brought that dog with him. We were all afraid to go down there because if he wasn't around, that dog was mean. So we had to keep that dog. It's one of those things you don't ever forget when you're worried about your life. And that dog was quite capable of taking it. That was his job in the Army, was to do that. And the wife of one of his Uncle Porter's and Aunt Dora's kids fixed a cake one time. And another cousin, we were walking down the railroad track for some reason, I don't remember what, came back and it was a beautiful blue cake. So we were going to cut a piece, bit into that thing, and oh my gosh, she had put cornstarch instead of baking soda. It was the awfulest thing I ever tasted in my life. He and Aunt Kitty both had storm cellars, and storm cellars don't smell very good. At least they didn't back in those days. When they moved that house, Aunt Kitty's house, off of that lot, that's the only thing left of my youth, is that house where I was born, because the Duncan School is gone, the old high school is gone, and I've often wondered how they filled in that storm cellar and all the well that was on the back porch of that house, and it's just a plain old lot. After I mentioned what we did in the ice storm and stuff like that, in the summer times, of course, not too many of us had air conditioning. The closest thing we had to that was we had an evaporative cooler in one window and fans, and that's how we stayed cool at night. We played outside until a reasonable hour. In my case, it was always at least by 9 o'clock. But in the daytime, and in those days, we kind of stayed in the neighborhood, or I'd go out with my grandparents and play. But we were outside and find some cool place. I used to ride my bicycle down 2nd Street and down by Marsh Grimes' junkyard, where the cable plant was, and it was shady down there. And I loved to ride my bicycle down there and play like I was on a plantation road or something. And there was a friend on a corner down there. We would get out under the shade and play with our cars and make cities and stuff like that, as everyone else did. Bicycles everywhere. As a matter of fact, I was in high school and still riding my bicycle out to visit a girlfriend of mine that lived out by the golf course. The first car, I think Mike McDowell has one of the first friends who had cars, I remember getting real angry because my parents wouldn't buy me a car when I was in high school. And when I married and had kids and bought my daughter a car in Dallas, they thought I was throwing my money away because I bought them a car at age 16. Well, in Bonham at age 16, you could walk wherever you needed to go, but in Dallas, that kind of was difficult. So they just didn't understand that a car was necessary in the city. We would all, I mentioned before about going down to the drive-in. Of course, McKnight's Drug was the in-town hangout. And if a bunch wanted to go out to the state park dancing, we would all go up to McKnight's Drug and see who wanted to take what carload out there. And sometimes the parents would come up there and they'd take you out there too and then come back and get you. Sometimes they stayed. But we didn't lack for something to do in those days. That word bored that so many kids use today, we were never bored. I was an active athlete, not necessarily a successful one. Played football, enjoyed playing. Didn't have a whole lot of success at football, but I did get to go to the regional track meet with the mile relay. Matter of fact, we set a record in the district in the mile relay and bombed when we went to regional, but at least we got to do that. Got to put at least one trophy in the trophy case. Enjoyed it enough that I decided that's what I wanted to do when I went to college. So I majored in physical education and went out for football. And that particular year in North Texas was just at the tail end of the Korean War, and the head football coach had some players that got drafted or called up in the 49th to go to Korea, but they didn't ever make it to Korea. They started playing ball in Pacific Marine team, and he gave scholarships at the end of the war to the whole team. So he didn't have any scholarships for freshmen, so I didn't get to play, but he made me a grader in his football coaching class and got me my first coaching job, so that was kind of payback, I guess. We had a second year, we had a state champion Class A basketball team, and when I was coaching in Dallas, we had a runner-up state champion cross-country team, and I had a champion long jumper. So I had a lot more success at track than I ever did at football, and that was what my main sport was. Also, from that bunch out in James Bowie where I first coached, I'd never played basketball much because I wasn't very tall, but that state champion bunch taught me an awful lot about basketball that I used the rest of my career. Even after I was an administrator in Dallas, and even after I quit, I retired and went to work for a Catholic school, I coached a sixth grade team that we were runner-up to the champions. All that I got out of that bunch in James Bowie because they knew how to play basketball. Yeah. That was a good story that my mother, I said, had four brothers. That was four brothers that lived. She had a set of twins and an older brother who died in the flu epidemic in the early 1900s. And one time she asked me to take her out to the cemetery in the country. I can't remember right now which one it was. It was out north of town, because they had straightened up one of her grandmother's headstone. And one of the boys, I think the older boy, Alton, was buried out there. So on the way back, another time she'd asked me and my brother Ed to clean up her grandfather's headstone and the twins' headstone that were out at Willow Wild. So I said to her, I said, well, how come Grandma Farmer and Alton is buried out in the country? The Owens Cemetery was the Owens Cemetery. And Grandpa Farmer and the twins are buried at the Willow Wild. She said, well, when Grandpa Farmer died, it had come a big rain, and they couldn't get out to the cemetery because of the mud, so they had to bury him in town. And I guess when the boys died, they just decided to leave him in town. That was just the way it was back then. I don't know that she knew them very well at all. My brother Ed is 5.5 years younger than I am, and they always knew him in town as Eddie Bill. And how I got out of the two names, I don't know. But he had that moniker. If someone asked me, well, how's Eddie Bill doing? I know that they're all from Bonham, and so does he. He shed that bill when got big and went to college. He worked, he waited until he had 2 children before he saw the need to go to college, so he worked the night shift at TI and went to East Texas in the daytime to get his degree. And he finally got a pretty good job with the what was then the Texas Employment Commission. And he worked in the tax division, and he was the head of various tax divisions in the state before he got made the comptroller, where he had to sign off on all the people that sent their money for the employees to the Texas Employment Commission. It all crossed his desk, and he did that till he kind of got tired of the politics that went along with it. He always had to meet with the governor's office and all that stuff. So when he got close to retirement, he decided that he would just take a tax division supervisor job, and he was in Grand Prairie, and he moved back to Bonham, commuted to Grand Prairie for about 3 years. He had a unique way of doing it. He made a deal with the Motel 6 in the area, and he'd go in on Monday morning early, and he managed to schedule the Sherman area for Thursday afternoon. So he'd put he made it available to anybody that wanted to work 10 hours a day, 4 days a week, instead of doing it 5 and 8. So when he'd finished on Thursday afternoon, he'd come home. So he really was gone only 3 days. And he did that till he retired. But after that, he lived out at the lake, and he was doing a lot of stuff around the lake, and he applied for a job with FEMA, and it took him 2 years to do all the background stuff, and since then he's been gone quite a bit to various places with FEMA. The last one was he said I couldn't turn that one down. He went to Ruidoso, New Mexico to be the project manager for the floods they had in El Paso. He was staying at a casino hotel, courtesy of the government, that the balcony overlooked the lake and the mountains, and they are paying all the bills. That was a prime assignment for him. When we were growing up, he was a better athlete than I was. He was an all-district football player, and he went to the state in the high hurdles. So we were over to a regional track meet in Denton. So when he was a senior, I went up to the head football coach, and I said, my brother is running track here today, but he was an all-district football player. Wonder if you'd consider giving him a scholarship. Well, he said, well, why don't you go over and talk to Pop, the track coach, and if he'll give him a track scholarship, I'll let him play football. So I went over to see Pop, and he said, I'll tell you what, you send him over to see Otis. If he'll give him a football scholarship, I'll let him run track. Which he ended up, I think he went to Paris Junior College. I think he ran over there one season and then quit the whole thing. One of the places he stayed it was a dump. But in it was a guy that was named Don Page, who ended up marrying my wife's sister. And also this Alan that sings with the Oak Ridge Boys was also in that Paris Junior College tourist court thing. I thought that was unusual. 3 guys that actually ended up everybody knowing about were all in that old dirty dump of a tourist court. In fact, that dates me right there, calling it a tourist court, doesn't it? I was a track coach at Crozier Tech, and while I was at Crozier, I was working part-time at Sanger Harris in the old A. Harris building downtown. I was getting on an elevator one day, and there's this a lady on there who said, well, I know her. And so after we got off the elevator, I said, aren't you from Bonham? And she said, yes. And it was Betty Lane, who was a freshman when I was in high school. She was a cheerleader. So Bonham was playing in a regional football game in Plano, and I asked her if she wanted to go, and after work we went to that game and started dating, and that was in October, and then we were married in May of 1965 and have two girls. And I eventually from Crozier Tech went into administration. I was assistant principal at Kimball, and then and then was the principal at Sidney Lanier in West Dallas. They, when the courts got a hold of the school systems in Dallas, they made, what's the name of that? It's been 20 years, so schools where you could come from all over town for specialties. They made a specialty out of Sidney Lanier, and we decided we would be a creative arts school. And so I had to resign my position and then be rehired to be the principal of that Vanguard school. And I got to choose my own teachers, and for that period of time, I had a pretty good amount of money to use to spend for teachers. We wrote our own curriculum. And so I took about 110 kids out of my neighborhood in East Dallas and bused them all the way across town to West Dallas, including my eldest daughter. And they were very successful. They were very, very good. So when they went to middle school, my wife, Betty, decided that she would make sure they had something to do. So she went to the band director at the junior high and said, in fact, all the mothers of the kids that rode that bus did that. And they decided that the band would be a good thing, an outlet for them to keep them busy. And so she decided that they needed a French horn player. So she and another one did the French horn. And that lasted all the way through, it lasted all the way through the middle of her degree at TCU. And the kids after the ball games at Bryan Adams would go various places to eat. And some of them, the atmosphere wasn't to our liking, so we wouldn't let ours go. So in turn, we said, I tell you what, you just have them come to our house. So my youngest daughter did the same thing. For 7 years, we had half of the BA band at our house every home game on Friday night. And it worked great. They had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun. And the kids stayed out of trouble. And that was the purpose of the whole thing. So Amy goes to TCU, and in order to get out of taking PE, she goes into the marching band for 2 years, stays with that until she has her PE credit, and then she quit the band. But it worked. Everything worked out real well. The youngest one decided she didn't really like school, so she didn't get her degree. But now, at age 37, she's back in school getting her degree. Her name's Laney, and that's another story. I wanted to name the first one that they didn't like what I wanted to name her, so I said I get to name the second one. And Lane was Betty's maiden name, so I said, all right, then it's going to be Laney, L-A-N-I, and she has not liked me ever since, because everybody always says it's Laney or writes it L-A-N-E-Y. So that's an albatross, she thinks. But anyway, she's doing real well. And both of them are hard workers. That's one thing I got across. Amy went for the Dallas Morning News as a graphic artist. And Laney has a job that she actually created with one company, an insurance company, and it's been sold about 10 times, and she's kept that same job that she created in the first place. She keeps up with the amount of money they take in and how much money they give out on claims. So she's kind of kept herself, even without the degree, kept her job through all those different changeovers. Betty and I had always decided that when we retired, and I retired a good deal before she did, we would move back to Bonham. And then she got this. She worked at SMU for 15 years, and because they had an agreement with TCU that they would reciprocate on tuition. So she went to work for SMU. Amy could go to TCU tuition free. Stayed there long enough to get her through college, and then she got this cushy job. She was the Dallas representative to an SMU summer school in Taos, Mexico. And we would have to go down there a couple of times a year, maybe 3. And she would get to go work and do whatever necessary, and I'd get to go play, fish, whatever. That was fun. And it was about good that she didn't want to retire, and I was getting ready to come to Bonham. So one day, I put the house on the market, and it didn't do any good. So I was ready to put it on the market again. And Amy said, well, there's this guy at work whose wife is looking for a house in our neighborhood so their daughter could go to a private school. So they came out and looked at the house and liked it. And they didn't hear anything. We didn't hear anything from him for a couple of months. And I said, well, look, we need to get this on the market. You tell him that they need to either do it or not. Well, that very next day, she and the realtor came around and we signed the papers. Betty comes home and I said, hey, let's get over the house today. So Betty tells everybody that she came home from work one day and the south house was sold. She had to retire so we could go move to Bonn. We lived in the same neighborhood for 35 years, and it was a good neighborhood near White Rock Lake. And that was a good place for me to walk and run. And matter of fact, when I was coaching track at Crozier Tech, we would always, my kids, there was just 6 of them, so I put them in the car and we'd go to White Rock Lake to work out. And then one of the city meets was at White Rock Lake, and I was working out there every day, and I'd work them on these hills. The kids did real well on those meets because they knew those hills like the back of their hand, and they worked on them so often that they'd make up time when we went up those hills while everybody else was struggling. So that was a good deal. When I was at North Texas, compared to today, it was very small. It was about 4,900, and I was fortunate enough to be in a fraternity and playing football in the spring for spring football. I knew all the athletes, and it was a very enjoyable time. We had big bands to come, and I was able to be a part of an end of an era at that time for colleges, in that we would go out to dance. We had Harry James band there one time, and you got out on the floor to dance, you didn't sit down at all until it was over. And we had Ted Beneke, and of course with at that time it was called the Aces, their prime lab jazz band that became the 1 o'clock band later on. And I had a fraternity brother that was in the Aces. He played the bass, string bass, and they made a lot of money because during the holidays they would book themselves all over the world. One year they went to Venezuela, and they got paid very well for doing that. And we had a reunion a few years back, and he was in Las Vegas teaching music in a junior high. And he used to sing for us, at fraternity, and he said he hadn't sung since he graduated from college. That was about 1955 or 6. But he remembered as we went through. When I graduated from North Texas and went into coaching, I went to a coaching school in Houston. There were 128 of us who got our degrees at North Texas and were coaches. And we all met and had a reunion, a whole bunch of us. I'll never will forget that. We spread out all over the country. And my first school was at James Bowie High School in Sims, Texas, which was a consolidated school. We had a guy named Cruz who was an all-state baseball player in the summertime. He was an all-state football player. He was named state basketball player and went to Houston on a football scholarship as a punter. He had a cousin who was named Donald Cruz, who was about, at that time, and he was in the 8th grade, he was about 6'5". So I learned a lot of basketball from them, but I had him on 3 different teams. He was played on the 8th grade team, the non-grade team, and the B team. And on the 9th grade team, he averaged 50 points a game, way more than the other team ever scored. So I decided I'd go to Dallas. Wasn't making any money in the country, so got a job at an elementary school, and in those days they had elementary football, so I had a pretty good group. Then I left and went on to Long Junior High, and had a guy on there, the best kid I ever coached, that became a city councilman in Dallas and ran the Mason race last time they had it. He was a good football player, and his dad was a psychiatrist who was used by the district attorney, Henry Wade. Every time he had to prove something, he was saying or champion, Clay Griffith to come to come, and Gary Champ kind of got some of those genes. I think he was really good. Then after I had my state champion long jumper, they started an administrative training group, and at the end of it, then we were all offered positions, and this kid was a junior, and I kind of didn't know that I wanted to leave him or not. Would go for another championship. So I went to one of the assistant superintendents and I said, what should I do? And he said, you need to take it. So I did, and was 19 years in administration. And finally, when I got my 30, and I was really wanted to go back to teaching, so I retired and went back to teaching in this Catholic school for about 5 years. And then I thought I was retired again. And my wife, Betty, said, I think you need to go back to work. And she got me her job at SMU, and she went to another one. I kept that for about a year and a half. And in the meantime, along the way, right after we were married, I decided to go get my master's. So I did that. And then I started a doctorate at North Texas. I got too involved in that, so I quit that. And then our superintendent at that time, Nolan Estes, got a deal with Nova University in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And this was one of the first external programs, and they were not real popular at the beginning. Now they're in every college in the nation. But we were kind of experimental, and the deal was, because it was a new program, we got to go free. I mean, the school district paid so much of money. It was a pretty reduced amount, but they flew the instructors to us in Dallas, and they were from all over the country. The University of Pittsburgh, that's where the ones taught how to write for thesis and dissertations. And a lot of the students that knew him would say, well, we want to be after him because Dr. Peter Kagan was his name, because we know that you'll know start right when he gets through like this. Boy, they were right. I didn't even read my final one because I knew I would graduate, and I didn't want to be just hear him taking me on like that. I wrote one paper and he tore it apart. I thought I knew what I was talking about till he got through with it. And then I didn't even want to read the last one. I just said, good, I'm graduating, that's enough. So that was I've been in 77, and I retired in 1988. And we moved to Bonham on Halloween 1999. It wasn't long before Mildred Welch got me involved in the Ford English Society. And I've been, Barbara Gore and I have been leading tours since 2000. She was there leading tours before then, but I've been involved since 2000 in leading. And we're both still doing it. So I guess as long as we can get around, we're going to continue to do it. Then I went down to something was said about representation in the tourism committee, which at that time was with the Chamber of Commerce. And I said, I want to make sure that we get our share of everything. And so Emily Porter said, well, you just come be a member then. So that'll be 2001, somewhere in there. I've been a member of the tourism committee, and was always involved in the Retired Teachers Association, still am. And now with the advent of the Fannin County Historical Commission being restored, and after doing all that work down at the fort, I was very interested in doing that, and was encouraged by Gregory Hall to allow my name to be put into as an appointment, and so I've been working with him since, I guess, January. It's a lot of fun, and we've come a long way in a short period of time. Bonham has always been, for us growing up, a good place to be. We all had a lot of fun, learned about life, because we were all so close together here, in all ages. The Bonham has its reunion every 5 years of anybody that ever graduated from Bonham. I've not missed a one since I graduated, and I've only missed two since they've been doing it, and it's 35, 47, somewhere in there, the only two I've missed. It was in 1950. And been very, very, very enjoyable each time things are brought up. I grew up in the First Methodist Church in Bonham. As a matter of fact, down at the Historical Commission, I was looking through some pictures, and I saw the picture of the old First Methodist Church of a Bible class, and it stretched from one entrance to the next. And I looked up, standing against the back wall was my grandfather. And I'm assuming the one in front of him was my grandmother, but she had on such a big bonnet I couldn't tell if it was her or not. Dad had a lot of different offices in the church. He sang in the choir. When they built the new church, Bill Stevenson was the minister, and Dad kind of advised a little bit on the speaker system and the speakers and all that stuff, which I'm sure have been updated, but they're still in the same position they were when they first opened. Went off to college and visited various churches, and when Betty and I married, she'd always been a member of the Christian church. So we were members in Dallas of a couple of Christian churches for over 30 years, and came back here and ended up in the Presbyterian church. Both of us are very active in that now. People don't understand the differences in Dallas. When people get in trouble and it's broadcast on the news or in the newspaper, it's what school they graduated from. In the small town, it's what church they go to, and I thought that was extremely interesting. That's the way people are categorized, at least within the community, not necessarily in the paper. There's a lot of stuff like that that's just very interesting. I was interested in an article that they did on Mr. Bewley. He was credited saying that he bought that store from this kindly little man he didn't say this, his name was MacIver, and he worked kindly and he was good, but he was also a character. I've often wished I could have gone up in that attic to see what up there could have been anything up there from back to the turn of the century nearly, because I don't think either one of them ever threw anything away. Some of the characters that were around here when they were growing up, Dad worked at movie houses, and so we were always downtown, because we only lived 3 blocks from town, and everybody called me Little Buster, which was his nickname, was Buster. And Jody Biggers was one of the characters down there. He was, I think, Dr. Biggers' brother. And he had one of his thumbs had been cut off, and it was just a nub. And he'd love to get you to shake hands with him and then put that nub out on your hand where you're just screaming and hollering for help. That was one of the downtown characters that were a lot of fun. We had a shoe shine, I say like a boy, is a man named Eddie Hunter. He had a big house on the hill where, what is there now? It's where Sunset Grill was. It's where his house was. It was a beautiful house, white colors. It looked like a colonial mansion. And he worked for my grandfather, and he worked for a lot of other barbers in town. But he also was a singer that he'd go around and be a paid singer at various Black Methodist churches around the area. Made enough money to send his son to school in California, who became an owner of a cable company out there, and was well known everywhere. And he was just one of the most enjoyable people that I was ever around. His wife used to babysit me when I was just a baby. There were men in town back then, prominent men, who played 42 and were in members of couples bridge classes, who loved to play tricks on each other. And there aren't very many people like that around Bonham, but they were part of Bonham that was fun and exciting. Prominent lawyers like Edward Sutherland and businessmen, Barney Gross and Johnny Lane, Betty's dad, who owned a parts store, and they owned a cabin together up on Texoma, and they all had this strange sense of humor. They got one of their boats stuck on the mud one day, and they worked half a day getting that out. And Betty's dad, accidentally or on purpose, nobody ever knew, restuck it in the mud. So it took them the rest of the day to get the boat out again. And they got to where they called each other in the middle of the night. And Johnny went to bed at dark, and he got up at daylight. So in the middle of the night, that was tough on him. So they finally, after calling each other, they got together and signed a pact that they wouldn't do that anymore. And that was very, very interesting. Buddy Williams' dad was in that, and Buddy always tried to be like his dad in that regard. One of the things, we have a teacher that a lot of folks in Bonham had that's always said, "You never get something for nothing." And that, I bet I've told kids that a million times. B.P. Weeks said that over and over and over. And he was such a good teacher that my mother had him in school, made C's under him, went to the University of Texas and made A's in chemistry. When I had him, bless his heart, he was toward the end of his career and had to wear glasses, or not really glasses, they were kind of like goggles that magnified it up to 40 times, but he knew where everything in that chemistry lab was, and he knew if you'd made a mistake by the smell of the chemistry. So we didn't blow it up, so another kid did, but one of the things I regret is that the group of kids that I was the closest to, they were all football players. My best friend, Mike McDowell, died in a plane crash as he was trying to save the Air Force plane that he was checking out. Another one was James Ball, who we were, I guess it was 19 years old, and we were pulling out from the stop sign by the jail and going up toward the square, and I squealed the tires on it, and the highway patrolman had me over by the time we got to the square. And it happened to be the year that they had opened up a training program to 19-year-olds. And James took advantage of it, and he became a highway patrolman. And in the height of the Johnson years, he was assigned to that guard duty, and he kind of got tired of that. So he resigned from that and became the police chief in Mahia, Texas, eventually ending up as part of the Texas State Crime Commission. And he died of cancer, and all of my buddies, except for one, are gone. And that was one of the things I kind of miss about coming back home and knowing that they're not going to be coming back to see us. We were very close then and remain close always. I'm sure there's lots of stories that I have forgotten. And another member of that group of characters with Edward Sutherland and Johnny Lane and Barney Gross was Buster Cole. He was very much in on all that commissing and doing all that stuff. And I know who he was. I knew David, and it wasn't until I was grown and Betty and I'd be visiting here, and they had a couples bridge group, and sometimes they would ask us to come and play. Well, all the men always had to go to the kitchen, and Buster would hold court in the kitchen with stories and stuff like that, and he always had an opinion about everything, and he'd bait you trying to get you to get into an argument with him on his opinion. You never were going to win, I guarantee you that. But that was one of the characters that was here at that time. I'm not sure he really cared a whole lot about playing bridge, but he liked the fellowship. All of them liked the fellowship, as long as you didn't stay out too late.